Imagine a world where Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency born in 2009, is no longer just a digital asset or an investment tool, but the global reserve currency. Every country, from the United States to Japan, relies on it as the primary medium of international trade. No more dependence on the US dollar, no more traditional banks controlling the flow of money, and no central authority dictating monetary policy. It's a world where Bitcoin's decentralized nature and finite supply govern the global economy. If Bitcoin were the global reserve currency, the most immediate change would be in international trade. Currently, countries hold reserves in dollars, euros, or yen, creating a hierarchy in the global financial system that favors nations with strong currencies. Bitcoin, by contrast, is decentralized and borderless. This would level the playing field, allowing smaller economies to participate more equally in global trade. Importers and exporters wouldn't need to worry about currency fluctuations the way they do now, since Bitcoin's supply is fixed and predictable. But there are challenges. Bitcoin is volatile. Its price can swing wildly in a matter of hours. If it became the global standard, governments and businesses would need new tools to stabilize trade and investment. Derivatives markets, insurance mechanisms, and perhaps even government-backed Bitcoin stabilization funds might emerge. Central banks would lose their traditional ability to manipulate currency values, forcing a dramatic shift in global monetary policy. Society, too, would change. In countries with unstable currencies, Bitcoin could provide economic stability. Citizens could store value securely without fear of hyperinflation, a problem that has plagued countries like Venezuela or Zimbabwe. On the other hand, people without internet access or technical literacy could be left behind, creating a new type of financial divide. This shift also raises political questions. Would governments accept giving up control over their currencies? How would taxation work? Could a truly decentralized system survive if every nation needed a say in its rules? Bitcoin's code is global, immutable, and transparent, which means trust in institutions would shift from governments to software. From an economic perspective, the adoption of Bitcoin as a global reserve currency would be revolutionary. First, the money supply becomes fixed. Traditional fiat currencies can be printed at will, which allows governments to fund spending, respond to recessions, or control inflation. Bitcoin, however, has a finite supply of 21 million coins. That scarcity could stabilize long-term value, but it would also limit governments' ability to respond to crises. A global recession could be harder to manage without central banks controlling the money supply. Investment behavior would also shift dramatically. Currently, nations and corporations store reserves in safe assets like U.S. Treasury bonds. With Bitcoin as a reserve, investors would need new hedging strategies, and traditional banking models would evolve, or potentially collapse. Financial institutions that rely on lending and interest rate manipulation could face existential challenges. We might see the rise of new financial systems built entirely around crypto technology. Inequality is another important factor. Bitcoin rewards early adopters and those with access to technology. Countries or individuals holding large amounts of Bitcoin would have enormous influence over global finance. On the other hand, nations currently struggling with debt could potentially find relief by adopting a currency with predictable, deflationary properties. The redistribution of economic power could trigger a geopolitical shift, challenging the dominance of historically wealthy nations. Trade would become more transparent. Bitcoin transactions are recorded on a public ledger, making corruption and illicit transfers harder to hide. However, this transparency could also threaten national security or sensitive financial operations, forcing countries to find a balance between openness and privacy. Finally, innovation could accelerate. Bitcoin's underlying blockchain technology enables programmable money, smart contracts, and automated international transactions. Businesses could transact directly without banks, reducing fees and settlement times. Entire industries like remittances, cross-border lending, and insurance could be disrupted or reinvented. Economically, the world would be both more efficient and more volatile, depending on how societies adapt to these changes. If Bitcoin became the global reserve currency, the political landscape would transform. Traditional notions of sovereignty tied to national currencies would be challenged. Countries could no longer control inflation, enforce fiscal policy, or influence their domestic economies through monetary manipulation. Central banks, as we know them, might become obsolete or evolve into new roles as Bitcoin regulators or stabilizers. Global power dynamics would shift as well. Currently, the U.S. wields enormous influence because the dollar dominates international trade. If Bitcoin replaced it, the geopolitical advantage of the dollar would vanish. Emerging economies could gain more leverage, while traditional superpowers might lose some control over international politics. Alliances could be reshaped around access to technology and digital infrastructure rather than raw economic strength. On a societal level, the implications are equally profound. People would have direct access to a global currency, potentially reducing reliance on banks and traditional financial institutions. Individuals could hold wealth in a universally accepted form without intermediaries. For those in countries with volatile or corrupt banking systems, this could mean newfound financial security and freedom. Yet challenges remain. The reliance on digital infrastructure means cybersecurity becomes paramount. Internet outages, hacking, or technical failures could have catastrophic consequences. There's also the risk of deepening inequalities. Those without technical literacy, access to devices, or reliable internet could be excluded from the new economy. Governments and organizations would need to create education and access programs to avoid leaving large populations behind. Finally, adopting Bitcoin as a global currency could reshape human behavior and culture. People might view money differently, valuing scarcity and long-term stability over consumption and short-term gains. Transparency in transactions could foster trust but also erode privacy. Political debates might shift from fiscal policy to cryptographic governance, and trust could move from governments to software protocols. In short, a Bitcoin world would be exciting, complex, and unpredictable. Economically, it could stabilize value but challenge governments. Politically, it could redistribute power on a global scale. Societally, it could empower millions while marginalizing others. The world would adapt, and those who embrace this change early might reap enormous benefits. So what have we discovered on this journey into a future where Bitcoin is the global reserve currency? It would not be a small shift. It would be a complete reordering of how the world works, economically, politically, and socially. For centuries, money has always been tied to nations and empires. The Roman denarius, the British pound, the US dollar, each one carried the weight of a superpower behind it. Whoever controlled the reserve currency controlled influence, trade, and often the fate of nations. But if Bitcoin stepped into that role, for the first time in history, money would not belong to a government or a king. It would belong to everyone and to no one all at once. Economically, this could mean freedom from inflation, a safeguard against corrupt regimes, and a fairer global playing field. Citizens in unstable countries would finally have a way to protect their wealth without watching it evaporate overnight. Businesses would trade more easily, without the constant friction of exchange rates and currency manipulation. Yet this freedom would also come at a cost. Governments would lose one of their most powerful tools, control of monetary policy. They could no longer print money to escape debt or to fight recessions. Crises would need new solutions, and not all nations would adapt smoothly. Politically, the consequences could be staggering. The United States currently holds enormous global influence because the dollar dominates world trade. If Bitcoin replaced it, that advantage would vanish. Smaller economies might rise, traditional powers might fall, and alliances could shift toward those with technological strength rather than sheer financial might. Wars might not be fought over oil or borders, but over digital infrastructure, servers, and control of mining power. The balance of global power could tilt in ways that are impossible to fully predict. On a personal level, the changes could be just as dramatic. Imagine a world where a farmer in Africa, a programmer in India, and a banker in London all use the same currency. No middlemen, no hidden fees, no inflation eroding value. For billions of people, this could mean true financial independence. But we must also imagine the risks: hackers, outages, cyber wars, and the exclusion of those without reliable internet or digital literacy. Could humanity really handle a system where everything depends on code and connectivity? If you've enjoyed this journey, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next big discussion. But most importantly, I want to hear from you. Do you think Bitcoin could really become the global reserve currency? Would it make the world fairer or just concentrate power in new hands? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading them all. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and remember, the future of money might not be decades away. It may already be here. The question is, are we ready for it?